all these conspiracy theories exist on a spectrum. There's less extreme ones and there's more extreme ones. Like saying JFK was killed by the Cuban government would be not a very extreme conspiracy theory, because Lee Harvey Oswald went to Cuba, I believe, or at least he went to Russia. So that's a simple conspiracy theory. Yeah, he might have met with Cubans anyway. So let's say Lee Harvey Oswald was in league with the Russians. It's a very simple conspiracy theory. There's no real evidence for it. Well, there's anecdotal evidence and some hearsay and whatnot. But then you got really extreme conspiracy theories like the world is flat and the government is covering up the fact that the world is flat and trying to persuade everybody that it is round, which is obviously a very extreme and ridiculous conspiracy theory. And then you have all the ones in the middle, like chemtrails is a bit towards one end, and 9/11. There's all kinds of different 9/11 conspiracy theories, just ranging from Bush let it happen, all the way up to the dustification, beams from space type things, and the no plane people. Absolutely. So there's all these ranges of conspiracy theories. So I have 9/11. I have chemtrails. I have false flag shootings like Sandy Hook and the Boston Marathon bombings. And I have flat Earth, so I cover everything. So there's something for everyone. Even if you're a 9/11 truther, then maybe you have a friend who believes in chemtrails, or a friend who is a flat earther. Even they do exist.
Yeah, of course. But like, who do you see as the audience? I mean, is your audience thought to be like the truthers or the debunkers?
No, neither really. It's the audience is people who know people who believe in conspiracy theories, and they want to understand them, like their friends or relatives. You might even be married to them. Like some people, lots of people get divorced because one person starts becoming a conspiracy theorist and gets obsessed with these conspiracy theories. So the audience is people who want to learn how to talk to friends or relatives who are stuck down the rabbit hole of conspiracy theorists and how to help them out. Okay.
Yeah, it can be tricky. I mean, I don't have a relative per se, but I did have some close to me that for a while said that they were believing in conspiracy theories about 9/11, but then they sort of gave me conflicting answers, and then it sort of fizzled out. But I also have talked to people who like in my everyday life, when I was in a course 2 years ago, and the two people there were really into sort of all sorts of conspiracy theories. Like they were both women, and they were like totally into sort of everything. That's why I think that sometimes it's sort of like a cult almost, because once you sort of believe in something, say 9/11, then it's almost like not a gateway drug, but sort of like a gateway drug where once you have believed in something, you have sort of changed your point of view, so that you look at everything, every event in a certain point of view, so that almost everything looks like a conspiracy now.
Yeah, and I think it just makes it easier for people to believe one conspiracy theory once it's like they have to get over this first hurdle of once they believe that the government can do something like blow up the World Trade Center, then it becomes a lot easier for them to believe that the government is secretly controlling the climate with chemtrails.
Yeah, absolutely.
And even things like believing that the government could fake the shootings of school children at the Sandy Hook school shooting, or there was a big shooting in Las Vegas recently. And with those false flag type conspiracy theories, they almost have to believe every new shooting is a false flag, because otherwise it would make their previous belief not hold up. It's like with 9/11, they said that no steel frame building has ever fallen by fire, no high-rise building has ever fallen by fire, and this was not entirely true, but it was true in that there was nothing really comparable to the collapses of the World Trade Centers. And then we had the collapse of the Plasco-building in Iran, in Tehran, I think.
Right.
Which was, I think, something like not that big. It was like a 30-story building or something like that, or even smaller than that. But it was something that was comparable because it was steel framed and it collapsed due to fire.
Yeah.
And then the truthers have two options. They can either say, oh, well, that was nothing like the World Trade Center, and a lot of them did that. Or they can say, oh, well, then that must have been some kind of controlled secret demolition with nanothermite. And that's what architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth have done. They've become architects and engineers for Plasco Truth now.
Oh, is that what they officially said about that building?
They basically said that they think that it was probably a controlled demolition. And
wow.
Because it exhibits all of the things that you see in the collapses of the World Trade Centers, and to a certain extent, so World Trade Center 7, but like you see what they call, what AE911 calls squibs, which isn't a correct term for anything, but it's what they call these little puffs of air coming out of the side of the building.
Yeah.
And you see the same thing in the Plasco-building in Tehran. And so they either have to drop squibs as part of their mythology, or they have to incorporate Plasco into their mythology. And because the squibs were such a huge part of their mythology, they chose to believe that this one building in Tehran was somehow the same type of thing as the World Trade Center. And it's ridiculous, of course, because it's just this little building, this old building in Tehran that has nothing to do with anything really. And it was on fire, and it was being used kind of as apartments and stores, and there was loads of clothing and stuff being stored in there, and propane tanks being used for cooking, and it obviously just collapsed from fire. But they had to believe that it didn't, because otherwise their whole story would have fallen apart.
Yeah, I didn't know that they had made a statement saying that. That was a bit surprising, actually.
Oh, they've done more than that. They've written a 40-page document explaining in great detail why they think that it was a controlled demolition. It's on their site somewhere.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
No, do you know about the guy also in Alaska, the University of Alaska, professor, I think is?
Leroy Hulsey.
Oh, yeah. Leroy Hulsey.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, Leroy. He got paid to do a study by architects and engineers from 9/11 Truth, and they originally described it as a study that was set out to demonstrate that the buildings could not have collapsed from fire. They changed the description after it got started to investigating why World Trade Center 7 didn't. Why World Trade Center 7 collapsed? But it seems fairly obvious that they're trying just to demonstrate that it couldn't collapse from fire. And the way they're going about it is a bit ridiculous in that they're only focusing on this one connection in World Trade Center 7, which is the connection of girder A2001 to column 79, which was something that NIST hypothesized might have been pushed off to the side by the expansions of the beams that are going into it. But that's just one hypothesis, and it might be that didn't actually happen. There's lots of other different ways that the building could have collapsed. But basically, the broad strokes of NIST's theory about World Trade Center 7 is that there were floor failures around column 79 that eventually led to column 79 being unsupported. Now, there's a more detailed version where they say that this one connection failed, and that's what led to the floor failures. But other connections could have failed first. It's got to start somewhere, and things are a lot more complicated than it's a complicated system. It's not just you can't just focus on one system or one connection.
So I mean, my understanding was that a lower floor that was on fire came down and caused the ones below to come down also, and then the ones on top of the first floor also came down, and then column 7 to 9 was unsupported on one side, like you said, and collapsed. But are you saying that they were fairly like open-minded about how it started?
Well, if you've probably seen the computer simulations that NIST did.
Yeah, but it was some time ago.
Yeah, and people make a lot of the fact that it looks a bit different to the actual collapse. The outside of the building kind of folds over a bit. But what a lot of them don't notice, and this is something I brought up with Tony Szamboti, Tony Szamboti, who's Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth. In a discussion with him, I told him that those simulations don't actually use that particular connection. The connection that the A2001 column 79 connection. If you look at the simulations, that girder doesn't fall in the simulations until later in the simulations. What happens is 6 other girders fail simultaneously because of accumulated fire damage.
Okay.
And yet AE911 has been saying that they had assumed for the last 10 years, since 2008, when the NIST report came out for World Trade Center 7, they'd assumed for 10 years that was that simulation had that particular girder failing. So they point to these simulations and saying, "Look, this wasn't what happened," and then they say, "Oh, we proved that connection couldn't fail." Well, the simulations don't use that connection. They use completely different connection failure. In fact, they don't even use connection failure at all. They use beam failure, where the beams sag down in the middle. So I told this to Tony, and he was like, no, they must do that. They've got to do that. And then I showed him where he didn't, and he was just, he tried to blow it off, but he'd been believing the wrong thing about the 9/11 NIST report for the last 10 years.
Well, I mean, as you said, I've also seen that, especially the University of Alaska really did focus on that one that you were talking about, because they said that according to our investigation, when this floor was heated, I can't remember exactly what events occurred, but they said something like when this floor was heated, that caused the column to move in the other direction than NIST said. And that means that the NIST report was false. But then they said that we need to make further studies to confirm that there wasn't something wrong with our investigation, or that we can rule out some other reason for the conclusion that we get from this. So that's why they have taken 1 more year since they made that first statement. And that was last September that they made that statement, and now we are still waiting for their next statement. And I think this month actually they made some kind of presentation, and one of the bunkers, maybe you have seen the link that he put up in the email. He sent actually the video to it, but I haven't looked at it yet. But Leroy Hulsey has made some kind of statement this month, September 2019.
Yeah, he was on the radio show, the internet radio show 9/11 Freefall.
Ah, okay.
And he basically gave a short interview where he discussed a few aspects of his study. And I think he basically said he thought that it wasn't a natural collapse, which I think means that he thinks it wasn't a fire-driven collapse. But he didn't really give any technical details, so it's difficult to say, where the study is right now. And so we're just going to have to wait and see. But the study is obviously going to be limited. He had basically 2 postgraduate PhD students there who were working on it, and they built the